Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? And hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, I thought that I would talk about the fight that ended up happening, or really the blitzkrieg that I should really say, between that of Keith one time Thurman and that of a Sebastian Fundora. And of course, I ended up getting this fight prediction right. Now, in the way that it was going to end up happening, of course, I got it a little bit wrong because I think that I predicted that Keith Thurman was going to be able to last a decision, or at the very least last until that of the latter rounds. Because Sebastian Fundora is a little bit hard to predict about how good he actually is. Because this man did get knocked out by Brian Mendoza not too long ago. That being stated, I think that if they more than likely were to have a rematch, that Sebastian Fundora probably either A would stop him or more than likely would beat him. Brian Mendoza is, probably about a B grade level fighter. He's a relatively talented B or C grade level fighter, but he's someone that was able to beat Fondora because he hit him with the right punch. And, basically Fondora is a guy that sometimes gets a little bit too zesty, or maybe zesty is not the right word, but he gets a little bit too bloodthirsty for his own good. And with his size and at times with his lack of defense, he gets in there and sometimes he gets a little bit overzealous. And that ended up costing him to get knocked out. But of course, it also was no secret. Fondora, even at the best of times, he is very hittable. He's someone that does not move his head off the center line extraordinarily well. And of course, when you're that tall for the 154-pound weight class, this man is literally the tallest man in all the boxing, even comparative to that of the heavyweight division. He is about 6'5.5" to 6'6" with an 80-inch arm reach. Why the hell would you really move your head off the center line that much? Because there's no way that you're going to duck under punches. So, I mean, the point overall is that Fondora right now, overall, kind of similar to that of an Israel Adesanya, although I'm going to talk about that because, of course, many people have been talking about Israel Adesanya's most recent loss, although he's lost many of his most recent fights, I believe, to the new up-and-coming UFC contender Joe Pfeiffer or Joe Pfeiffer, whatever his name is. Sebastian Fundora is a person that can fight in a certain way, especially with his hands down and not moving his head off the center line because he's used to fighting guys that, clearly cannot handle his size. Do I believe that Sebastian Fundora is going to beat guys like Carlos Adams or Janabek or something like that? No, personally, I do not believe that he's going to beat those guys. But I at least will give Sebastian Fundora credit. Like I had seen within that of the rematch of a Tim Tszyu, it was fairly obvious to me that Sebastian Fundora, that he did make some slight improvements and adjustments. Now, is he someone that is ever going to be on the level of a Terrence Crawford or an Alexander Usyk or, someone like that? No. He's someone that, very clearly knows his advantages and the way that he fights. I don't think that he realizes some of the issues that he's going to have later on if he moves up weight classes or if he fights someone that is truly elite. But, we'll see what ends up happening. But that being stated, certain people may ask my personal opinion. What happened to Keith Thurman in this fight and why did Sebastian Fundora win in such dominant fashion? Was it because Keith Thurman, overall was basically just old and washed up? Was it because that Sebastian Fundora overall was just that much better? Was it because he was that much younger and fresher or that much bigger? What was really the reason? Or was it a combination of all things within this fight? Well, of course, for those of you that did not hear the news, Keith one-time Thurman basically got blitzkrieg within that of 6 rounds, and I believe that it was stopped either in the early or the middle part of the 6th round. And I thought that Keith Thurman at the very least was going to be crafty enough and maybe be able to keep Sebastian Fundora off of him enough to run him into certain shots overall to kind of last until the latter rounds. I thought that if Sebastian Fundora was going to get a stoppage, that maybe it would be within that, of anywhere from round 9 to round 10 or round 8 to round 10. I definitely did not expect him to knock him out this early. But what the truth really is about this fight is that Keith Thurman, he definitely was not the freshest fighter. He's only fought a couple of times within that of the past several years. Certain injuries have caught up with him. But another truth about Mr. Keith one-time Thurman also is that even though many people look at him as this massive intellectual boxer, his boxing IQ never really was quite as high as what many people claimed it to be. He was able to completely dominate or beat certain guys like that of a Robert Guerrero, or look good against guys like Danny Garcia or Sean Showtime Porter, guys that are A-grade level fighters, but guys who are beatable. But I don't think that Keith Thurman ever truly beat a guy that was ever going to really threaten on the top 10 pound per pound list. I mean, Danny Garcia was top 10 pound per pound at one point in time, but I think that it was fairly obvious that eventually when Danny Garcia fought a true other top 10 pound per pound talent, that more than likely he was going to get beat. But do I believe that Keith Thurman ever would have defeated guys like a peak Terrence Bud Crawford or a peak Errol Spence, or that of a peak, even possibly a peak Kell Brook. I don't know if I would have favored him over any of those guys. Maybe he would have beaten Kell Brook just because at times Kell Brook could keep his hands down a little bit too low. But I think that Kell Brook threw enough straight punches, was powerful enough, and had a slick enough jab overall to really possibly beat that of a Keith one-time Thurman, just in my personal view. Terrence Bud Crawford, I think, would have very easily stopped him more than likely. And Errol Spence, in my view, more than likely probably would have broke him down or at the very least beat him by dominant decision. But that would have been a very interesting fight with both of them at their peaks because Errol Spence is someone that does not move his head off the center line, but he is more defensively responsible than that of a Keith one-time Thurman at his best. And one thing I'll say about Keith Thurman is this. All his faults and all the things that I stated in my fight prediction basically ended up coming to light in this fight. Keith Thurman is not someone that is a defensive wizard. He's not someone that is a defensive master. Oftentimes when he throws combinations or throws punches, he will not overall quote unquote hold the phone or keep one hand up. Oftentimes you can catch him in certain exchanges because he gets a little bit too wild and a little bit overzealous. He gets a little bit too bloodthirsty, and Keith Thurman almost has a little bit of a Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde, kind of side to him, where one side, of course, seems to be very balanced, but the other side, seems to be a little bit mentally unstable. Keith one-time Thurman, although he has that side to him that is very intellectual, he also has a side to him that, overall sometimes likes to go for the knockout. And that leads to him sometimes lunging in with punches with both feet off the ground or both feet off the floor or the ring. And then at times, leads him to having both hands down or throwing a combination or exchanges where he gets a little bit too wild and he can be hit in the process. And I remember multiple fights where Keith Thurman was hurt against Sean Porter, Luis Collazo, and other fighters, including Manny Pacquiao, because at times, overall he would put himself in harm's way. And another thing about Keith Thurman that I stated in my fight prediction was that I was not really quite sure if Keith Thurman was going to do the thing that he needed to do in this fight, which was to carefully, kind of cut the ring off against Sebastian Fundora at times and really try to get to work against him, by cutting off the ring and really putting the pressure on Fondora. Keith Thurman has never really been that type of fighter. There'll be spurts, like I stated, to where he'll come forward at you, kind of like against Danny Garcia and Sean Porter, where, he will, try to get you to get off him. But Keith Thurman is really more of a guy to where he prefers for you to come to him. That's really the type of way that he fights. But if you force Keith Thurman to come to you the whole entire time, it's not going to be a very good occasion for him. And we've seen that against Manny Pacquiao, even at 43 years old, 42 years old. And we also seen that tonight against Sebastian Fundora. I'm going to state this, and certain people may disagree. I do not personally believe that the only reason why Keith Thurman lost this fight was because of his inactivity and his age. And a lot of people may personally disagree with me. But a lot of the times when fighters get older, when their strength or when their speed, when their movement is not quite the same, a lot of the flaws that they always have within their style are a lot more glaring. And when you take a look at Keith Thurman once again, he is not someone that is an A+ level defensive fighter. He uses his feet, his power, and his offense pretty much as a defense. And he can parry to a degree. He's someone that does keep his hands up, but he's not a defensive master, which is at times why he was caught overextending, like he was caught lunging in with punches, and while he was caught with a jab and a left hand and other things as well. Keith Thurman is someone that will put himself in harm's way. He is not someone that was ever, quote unquote, say on the level of a Terrence Bud Crawford. When you take a look at a Terrence Bud Crawford, although at times he definitely has put himself in harm's way with the defensive ability, one thing I'll say about Terrence Bud Crawford is this: although I have criticized somewhat of his defensive ability in the past, not like it's ever been horrible, but, I think that Crawford at times, at least during his career, was put a little bit more highly on the defensive list than what he deserved to be. But Terrence Bud Crawford, give him, I'll give him credit. Terrence Bud Crawford, I think, fights more to the level of his competition, like a lot of all-time great level fighters do. Terrence Bud Crawford, against Canelo and also against Errol Spence in the two biggest fights of his life and career, he basically was defensively spotless. And I have to give him a great amount of credit for that. Now, are there other fights like against Madrimov and other things like that to where some of his defensive, flaws at times were exposed, like him letting, getting certain fighters in the range or, him overall sometimes, not moving his head off the center line in certain up close ranges? At times, yes, but overall, Terrence Bud Crawford is a much more sound defensive fighter, even with just using his hands or keeping his hands up, than what that of a Keith one-time Thurman is. And Keith Thurman really needed to get in against Sebastian Fundora here. He really needed to make sure that he was going to get off of him. because Fondora was not taking the bait. He was not just going to go in there and run right into Keith Thurman's punches. And as soon as Keith Thurman overall seen that, he basically was like, oh shit, what the hell am I going to do against this guy? Because you can keep moving and moving and moving around in circles all you want to. But if that guy's not, collecting the bait, and if you're not able to run him into certain shots and defend very well, which Keith Thurman was not able to do any of those things, you're going to have to get within that range. And Keith Thurman was really not willing to do that. I mean, I'm not going to say that he was not willing to do that, but he was not able to do it in an intelligent enough way. And to be honest with you, I don't think that Keith Thurman really ever had that ability in the first place, at least to do it in the same way as what a Crawford does or what an Alexander Usyk does. And this is why, once again, I have to give Alexander Usyk, who ended up defeating a Tyson Fury, someone who was looked at as a legit A-grade, great level heavyweight for his era, and not even just a heavyweight, but a super heavyweight. This is also another reason why we have to give Alexander Usyk credit for defeating someone like that, as skilled as that of a Tyson Fury. Because one thing that you noticed about Alexander Usyk when he faced someone with that significant of a reach advantage over him, Tyson Fury did the same thing. He kept his hand out, overall tried to maintain distance. But Alexander Usyk, what he did, basically said, okay, well, no problem. All I'm going to do is duck under the body, excuse me, is duck under the body and go with the left hand straight to, down to the body. And then Tyson Fury, kind of was caught a little bit off guard because there's not a lot of fighters that really know how to do that. And that's why Alexander Usyk, you have to give him a lot of credit, because even against some of the greater fighters in his career that he has fought, both at cruiserweight and also that of the heavyweight division, Keith Thurman even does not have that level of fight IQ. And Keith Thurman is, I'm not going to claim he's an all-time great level fighter, but he's someone overall that is a great fighter. He is someone that is a very, very decent fighter. At one point in time, if he was never official top 10 pound per pound, he was at least pushing on the top 10 pound per pound list on certain lists. He did get 3 debatable A-grade level wins in his career: Robert Guerrero, Danny Garcia, and Sean Porter. But Keith Thurman, he kind of came back here because I think that Keith Thurman, was itching to come back because he feels that there was a little bit left behind in his career. But I think that this is, to be honest with you, probably going to do a little bit more damage than what it probably is going to do a little bit more help. Because Keith Thurman, kind of after that Errol Spence situation, Keith Thurman was kind of looked at as avoiding Spence there for a little bit. And I think that he tried to come back and, maybe overall redeem his career a little bit if he was going to be looked at as a quote-unquote unified guy, and then possibly call out Errol Spence or Crawford. And even if those fights don't get accepted because Crawford is, retired, and Spence basically has been retired ever since Crawford whooped the shit out of him, overall, if Keith Thurman doesn't get those fights, then maybe he can possibly put it in a better light. Just in my personal view, that's more than likely what Keith Thurman was going to do. And then he can claim that, well, I wanted the fights. I came back at 36 years old, beat Sebastian Fundora, who was the best guy there, the quote-unquote best guy there, the unified champ, and yada, yada, yada. And I give Keith Thurman at least a little bit of credit for doing that. But I think a part of the reason why Keith Thurman did that was because he knew that his career mortality was starting to come up. And what do I mean by that? I'm not just talking about the possible end of his career in terms of his age. I think that he also knew and was smart enough to realize that people are going to take a look back at his career and say, Keith Thurman was a relatively great fighter, but what did he really leave behind? He had that great win over Danny Garcia. He had a very good win over Sean Porter. He had that win over Robert Guerrero. But other than that, what truly stands out? He was someone overall that, overall really was supposed to be a lot more than, what he ended up being. Keith Thurman, once again, was someone that at one point in time was pushing top 10 pound per pound lists. And I talk about, certain careers that, in my personal view, were a little bit wasted. Demetrius Bubo Andrade, Victor Ortiz, in my personal view, or at least debatably, overall, Gervonta Tank Davis. But to be quite honest with you, Keith Thurman kind of wasted his career to a certain degree as well. And I think that he also understands that to a degree, that many people are going to take a look back at his career, and he's never going to be mentioned in the same conversations as guys like Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence. He's not going to be mentioned in those same conversations. Because to be quite honest with you, when you take a look back at it, although he definitely has a great career, it's not quite on the level of those guys. Because Errol Spence not only has a win over Porter, but he has a win over Danny Garcia. He has a win over Kell Brook. He has a win over Yordenis Ugas. And he at least got in the ring with the Terrence Bud Crawford. Now, Keith Thurman, of course, called out Floyd Mayweather at one point in time. He was a guy that, overall also got in the ring with the undefeated Danny Garcia and Sean Porter as well, and some of those guys. But, and this is why I always say this. People always, give a lot of these fighters who are young and hungry and upcoming, and they give them so much credit overall when they're undefeated and haven't even won a belt yet. And they say, well, we have to give them so much credit because they're calling out everybody, blah, blah, blah. You have to really wait until another big dog really shows up. That's pretty much when you really have to wait to give that fighter credit. That's why guys like Inoue and Usyk and some of those other guys get so much credit for me because they pretty much have basically showed that they've been willing to fight on all comers. Now Usyk at the current moment in time, of course, is a little bit different because he's damn near 40 years old, and I think that to be honest with you, he only has about two more fights left within him after this fight this year. So I can kind of understand that. But the point is that Usyk, the biggest targets at cruiserweight and also at the heavyweight division, he was willing to do that at his peak. Keith Thurman was at his peak still around the time when he was a semi-unified champion there. And once Errol Spence kind of started to show up, Keith Thurman had kind of disappeared. And certain people, of course, would blame the injuries, but Keith one-time Thurman, in my personal view, he, just in my view, he kind of over-exaggerated those injuries to a certain degree. And there are certain fighters that do that. I think Dimitri Bivol probably did that to a certain degree against Artur Beterbiev because he said, I'm the unified champion now. If they're not paying me enough, or if it's a fight that I don't think is worthy, then fuck it. I'm just going to move on to something else because I don't need to fight him for a third time. Artur Beterbiev was 40-some years old. I'm someone that, ain't no spring chicken either, but I can outlast him if they're not giving me what I want. So the point overall is that there are a lot of fighters overall that do that, and Keith Thurman, in my personal view, did that, but that's just my 2 cents on it. Keith Thurman, of course, he showed a lot of effort in this fight, but he did not show the ability in order to beat someone like that of a Sebastian Fundora. And that pretty much is about it for Keith Thurman. I mean, when I turned on the fight, I had to rewatch it because, I had to go out and get some. I think I got like a soda or something like that from McDonald's. I ended up getting a soda from McDonald's, and I was talking to, overall my parents on the phone because they were about to watch the fight. I come back, it's round 6, and I see Thurman's face look like he just got in a fight with Razor Blade Man. I'm like, what the fuck happened? But anyways, that pretty much is about it overall for today. As for Sebastian Fundora, where does he really go from here? Well, pretty much the way that he goes from here is that he fights that of a Xander Zayas next, a Puerto Rican fighter. I do not believe that Xander Zayas more than likely would defeat that of a Fondora. I think that he probably would have more of a chance than Thurman, at least debatably, but Fondora is someone that in my personal view is just way too big for that weight class, A for one. And the only fighters that are really going to potentially beat him, just in my view, are going to be someone like that, or is going to be someone like that of a Duran Butenis or Virgil Ortiz. A fight that I would really love to see Fundora in is a fight against Virgil Ortiz. Because Ortiz is someone that he may not have the quickest of feet, but he does have very good feet. He has relatively good defense. He punches like a horse kicks, and he's someone that has great boxing ability. Duran Butenis would be very interesting as well, because although Butenis is a great fighter, he's someone that, kind of likes to move around a little bit, and I'm not quite sure how he would handle the Fondora style. Because Duran Butenis also gets hit a little bit more than what he probably should, to be honest with you. Virgil Ortiz might actually have more of a chance against that of a Fondora than that of a Duran Butenis. And that's not me claiming that Virgil Ortiz is necessarily more skilled than that of a Duran Butenis, but styles make fights. And to be honest with you, the way that Virgil Ortiz fights coming forward, I think that Virgil Ortiz might actually have more of a chance to beat that of a Fondora than what a Duran Butenis would. Now, who would win in a one-on-one fight between Ennis and Boots? I would probably favor a Boots Ennis just because of the quicker feet, but you never know. It would be very interesting. Either way, both of those guys are possible, future top 10 pound-per-pound level fighters. So I would love to see that fight. Of course, it appears that Virgil Ortiz's side, at least as of lately, has been a little bit tentative. So, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. But that being stated, Duran Butenis hasn't really been rushing in the ring to get in with anybody elite either. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. But that pretty much is about it. We'll see where this goes from here. Is Sebastian Fundora also, by the way, someone that I consider a weight bully? Absolutely 100%, no doubt about it. And anyone who knows me knows that I would consider this situation a quote-unquote weight bully situation. If you're way taller, bigger, and lengthier than everyone else, there's only so much credit that I can give you, even if it's over a decently great, very crafty fighter like that of a Keith one-time Thurman. But to answer the final question, how much credit does Sebastian Fundora really deserve for this win? I mean, I'll give him maybe a B+ for this because A, I don't know how good Thurman is, and on top of that, he pretty much very clearly, was bigger than Thurman by about 2 weight classes. So there's only so much credit I can really give for him, for this. But, I really want to see Fondora against the middleweight fighters. Those are the guys that I really want to see him against. Now, if he actually beats guys like Janabek or Carlos Adams, then I'm going to have to talk about Sebastian Fundora in a different light. If he actually beats those guys, then I'm going to have to talk about him in a different light, even though those guys are even clearly smaller. But at least he can, kind of compete against fighters more his own same size there. If he's able to beat some of those guys, then okay, we'll start talking. But I'm not I'm not really looking at Fondora until I see him beat someone like a Duran Butenis or Virgil Ortiz or something like that. And even a Xander Zayas, I mean, it's cool, but I don't think anyone takes a look at Xander Zayas, at least from what I've seen. everybody takes a look at that guy and says, wow, he's an A+ level fighter. To be honest with you, I don't even know if Xander Zayas is an A grade level fighter. And I know that people will say, what are you talking about? He's won 2 of the titles. Just because you win 2 titles in a weight class does not mean that you're an A grade level fighter. Take a look at Joey Sandango. I mean, it is what it is. There are many other fighters who won 2 titles in a weight class, overall in a particular weight class at one time, and they were not A grade level fighters. So, I mean, it is what it is. But that being said, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see where Mr. Sebastian Fundora goes next. As for Keith Thurman, I think it's time for retirement. And I think that he knows that as well, because who else are you really going to face? I mean, you could face Xander Zayas, but are you really going to get that fight? I mean, it doesn't really make any sense. And I doubt that he would beat Xander Zayas after taking a look at that ass whooping. So I mean, it is what it is. And Thurman did look a little bit slower than what he used to be. He still looked like a great athlete in there, but fighting a guy of this size at this age, being this inactive for how long he's been, and on top of that, with the faults that he always had in his style at this age, it was just never going to fly. I expected him to last a little bit longer than what he did, but he didn't, and I'm not really too surprised about it. But anyways, my fight prediction was right, overall for this fight. Overall, probably one of the more accurate ones that I've had as of recently. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see what happens next with both fighters. Peace out for now.